somewhere in the back of my head, I knew there was a good story in the adventures of this producer that I was working for when I was 16 years old. He used to produce plays by having his investors come to his office, and they were all over 80, and he would make love to them, and they would give him money. And they usually make out a check to the current title of his play, which was always cash. And he would make love to these little old ladies, and you'd hear them screaming, "I love you, go!" It was an embarrassment to the whole building. But meanwhile, he got his money and he put on his plays. And I said, it's an unforgettable character, so one day I'm going to write a story about him. I started as a book, too much dialogue, not enough narrative. So I said, okay, it's a play. So I began writing as a play, showed it to some friends of mine. Too many sets, too many scenes, too many sets. So I said, then what is it? They said, it's a movie. Dialogue and a lot of different places. I said, a movie? I never wrote a movie. They said, well, write it. It is a movie. So I wrote it as a movie. I brought it to Sidney Glazer. Sidney Glazer was having a tuna fish sandwich. I read Springtime for Hitler was the name of it then. And before I knew it, the tuna fish and the coffee was all over the place, and he was coughing, sputtering, and screaming. He loved it. And he said, I'm going to get this made. And he did get it made. We went to many producers. We got close at Universal because they said, Hitler is too strong, too menacing. How about Springtime for Mussolini? We'll do that. So the only guy that would listen to it and eventually did it was Joseph E. Levine, who was then making movies called Hercules Chained, Hercules Unchained, Hercules Almost Chained, Hercules the chain is slipping, Hercules broke the chain. He made about 6 movies with Hercules in a chain. And Joseph E. Levine went on to make The Lion in Winter, The Graduate, and The Producers. The guy did some incredible films in his brief span as a film company. And we had lunch, and during lunch he said, who's going to direct it? I said, I am. And he said, have you ever directed anything? I said, not really. And he said, what makes you think you can do it? I said, I'm the writer, Joe. I'm the writer. All those little scenes are in my head already. I see them. When I wrote them, I saw them. It'll save us a fortune. If you get a director, he won't know what the scenes are. He'll have to make them up. I know what they are. I'll save you thousands of dollars if you let me direct it. He took a big chance, and I'm forever grateful to Joseph E. Levine for that. And we began shooting a movie called The Producers. It could not be called Springtime for Hitler because many of the exhibitors, they would not put Hitler on the marquee. So I had to come up with a different title. I came up with this ironic title, The Producers, because these guys were anything but producers. And we had numerous adventures casting it, making it, distributing it. It was amazing. It was an amazing adventure. When it became in my mind a play, even before it was a movie, I envisioned this dynamo because Zero, his personality is very close to this producer who was screwing all these old ladies. And I needed an ego, and Zero had a big ego. He had everything. Zero had energy. He had brains. He was very smart actor. He had power. He understood who his character was at all times. And he was unashamed. He was very brave. A lot of actors hide in their characters, but a lot of the real Zero came out through Max Bialystock. So I always had Zero in mind. When I first gave him the script, his wife, Kate, was my secret weapon because I gave it to Kate first. I said, Kate, you think this would be good? She said, this would be great. Then I gave it to Zero. He turned it down. He said, this is not for me. But it had to be Zero. I wouldn't have done the movie. There was nobody else. Peter Sellers, he was in I'm All Right, Jack. He was in a picture called I'm All Right, Jack. It was great. And I was thought of him for Bloom. So I asked him about it. He said he would do it. Then I never heard from him again. So I said, he'll never do it. And then I began seeing Gene Wilder in Mother Courage. And I said, that's a guy who would give his eye teeth to play this part. He'd kill for it. And that's the kind of actors you want.
I was miscast in Mother Courage, Jerome Robbins directing and Anne Bancroft starring. Her boyfriend at the time was Mel Brooks, Monsieur Mel Brooks.
And every night he'd come off stage and he'd say to me, we got to be friends, he'd say to me, why are they laughing at me? I'm not funny. I said, you are funny. He said, I don't mean to be funny. I said, whether you mean to be funny or you don't mean to be funny, God says you're funny.
And one day he says, I'm writing a screenplay called Springtime for Hitler, and I only have 30 pages, he said, but I'll read it to you.
I said, you know, you'd be wonderful. You would just be made in heaven for Leo Bloom. And he said, oh, what a great character. I'd love to play. Oh, that's me. I am Leo Bloom. I'm afraid. I need Bialystok to give me the courage to live. Oh, I love that character. And he said, you'll never get it on. Nothing good ever gets done.
So 3 years went by. I never heard from him. I didn't get a letter, a telegram, telephone call, nothing. And I had just done Bonnie and Clyde, which was my first film. And I acted in 3 more plays on Broadway. And I was taking off my makeup one afternoon, knock on the door. I opened the door, and there was Mel with a tall gentleman next to him.
I came in with Sidney Glazer, and I said, we got the money, here's the script, you're Leo Bloom. And he broke into tears, and he wept. He said, I don't believe it. Something good could actually happen in my life. I don't believe it.
He says, you don't think I forgot, do you? This is the producer. We've got the producer here. I got the money, and we're ready to go. But I want you to meet Zero first, because I can't just cast you without you seeing it. He said, you're going to have to read for him. So I went to the office, and my heart was pounding, and I knocked on the office door. Mel opened it. I saw Zero Mostel in the background, and he says, Gene, this is Z. Z, this is Gene Wilder. I was so nervous, and I put out my hand to shake hands with Zero Mostel, and he grabbed my hand, he pulled me to him, and he kissed me on the lips. We started laughing, and all my tension flew out the window.
I remember we shot in a studio on 26th Street, owned by the Browns, High and Mendy. They always had fresh flowers in all the offices in the studio, and these were the 2 of the cheapest guys who ever lived. So we went up to them one day, and I said, hi, how come you got where do you get all these fresh flowers? You don't spend any money. He says, on the way in from Long Island, I always stop at the cemeteries, gather up all the flowers, and bring them into the office.
Estelle Winwood is a great actress. She lied about her age. I was in the casting call. We wanted a little old lady whose age was roughly 75 or 80. And she said she was 80, and she was closer to 90. And if there was any ad libbing, she did it. She poked Zero in unmentionable places and drove him crazy. Zero kept saying to me, get that crazy old lady out of here. She's driving me nuts, you know.
In those days, I was right. Mel used to say you're a perfect victim. The wolves are around because they smell a sheep, and you're the sheep.
If the script is well written and the actors are really talented and intelligent, you have to do very little directing. You'll just get in the way. So I didn't have to tell them to do much. I was just a traffic cop. I mean, I did very little directing. With Gene, I did very soft and quiet lying and told him in a nice, simple, kind manner that he was a genius and that we were so fortunate to have him. And then I would go to Zero and I would scream, you're the best thing in this. Without you, we're finished. Zero had been in a bus accident only 8 months before we were filming. And he was dragged 22 feet and his leg was damaged. And every time there was wet weather or if he'd be on it for a while, he was in pain. And he would often say, no, let's stop here. And I'd say, I have $941,000 to make this film suffer. Zero, get up and suffer. You know, and I'd push him and he'd suffer with that leg, you know, and I felt like, I don't know, like Rasputin or Diaghilev, you know, dance. I know your feet are bleeding, but dance, it's all for the ballet. I think, poor Zero. But anyway, it was my first movie, so I was heartless. I really was heartless. I wasn't such a nice person.
Zero had in his contract that he didn't have to work past 5:30 ever because he had a bad leg. And one evening, we really needed him to work past 5:30. And Sidney Glazer went to speak to him, and he says, absolutely not. I won't do it. And Mel went to speak to him and says, absolutely not. I won't do it. And he stormed off and went into his dressing room. So Sidney came over to me and says, Mike, Zero likes you. Why don't you go in and take a shot at him? So I walk in, and he's sitting there like a potentate with a grin on his face, with almost like a swallowed a bird, you know. And I said, Zero's going to be tougher on your leg if we have to shoot tomorrow on the set and then turn around and do something else. It would really make sense to work another 20 minutes, finish the sequence, and you'll be on your way. He said, tell you what, let me yell at you for 5 minutes. I'm going to yell at you here in the dressing room, and then I'll come out. I said, okay. So all of a sudden he starts at Hertzberg, you son of a bitch, you son of a... And he just went on and on. He berated me, carried on. So I walk out and everybody heard this. So I said, I guess he's not coming out. I said, I don't know. I said, maybe he will. And he came out and he did it. But he wanted everyone to think he was this lion, and he wasn't. He really wasn't.
Now, on my block on 11th Street, between 5th and 6th, was Dustin Hoffman, who Alan Schwartz, my lawyer, said was very good, a good little off-Broadway actor. So Dustin read Franz Liebken. He read it for me. He read it for himself. He said, I'm going to do it. I love this. I said, you're Franz Liebken. We had everybody all set to shoot this movie, and it's about 2 in the morning, and there's pebbles on my window. Pebbles, stones, what's going on? I open my window, I'm sleeping. Dustin's in the street. Dustin, what do you want? He said, you got to come down and talk. I said, it's 2 in the morning. He said, we got to talk. I go downstairs. What do you want? He said, you won't believe this. I just got a call at midnight from Mike Nichols. He wants me to fly out tomorrow to do a screen test. I said, for what? Mike is doing The Graduate. Ann is going to do The Graduate. He said, yeah. I said, Benjamin Braddock? They want you to audition for Benjamin Braddock? They've got to get a nice-looking boy. I said, you're signed to do Liebken. He said, you got to let me audition. I said, all right, they won't go. They won't hire you. You'll come back, you'll be Liebken, everything will be fine. So he gets on an airplane the next day. He calls me the same day. He gets there at night. They like me, they want me, I'm in. So for 3 days, I see 100 guys doing German accents. Nobody's good, nobody's good. And then this guy comes in, tall guy, wearing a German helmet. This is interesting. And it turns out to be Kenny Mars. And Kenny Mars is absolutely brilliant.
Mel thinks of himself as like a star maker. And so he says to me, I've given you this great part now, and you're going to be wonderful. I said, now listen, Mel. Yeah. I said, I'm going to be up there on the roof with the pigeons, and I'm wearing a helmet. I figure I should have some pigeon shit on the helmet. Pigeon shit. There you are. See, that's the kind of taste you have. I got my costume, and I don't know what possessed me, but I thought, this will help me if I take this costume home and I sleep in it every night, which I did. I did not smell like a rose.
One thing we never got in was when they were taking the Siegfried oath of wearing Wagnerian helmets, old-fashioned German helmets. It seemed overboard, so I cut it in the film.
Around the end of March 1967, I was graduated from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And I got a phone call from Alpha Betty Olson, and she said to me, would you like to audition for the producers? And it was right out of school, and they said, you have to know a Swedish accent. So I went to the library, and I talked to the librarian, and she said, well, maybe I could help you a little bit. She gave me a book, and it had the rhythm of the Swedish accent. And I learned my lines in the subway, and went up, and they put on Sock It To Me Baby, and I'm going, I'm having a great time dancing. And Mel Brooks knew just what he wanted. He loved watching it.
Lee Meredith, I think she just came with her face and her body. She just brought her body along, and we said, okay, that's a great body. And then her acting was perfect. I mean, she played this little Swedish doll, My wife had a very good friend who was a fellow student actor at the Actor Studio. His name was Andreas Voutsinas. He'd come from Greece to study in America with Lee Strasberg, and he was a very talented and wonderful guy, but a thick Greek accent. And she suggested that Andreas might be wonderful for the director's roommate. The character's name was Carmen Gia, named after the German Volkswagen sports car.
Mel Brooks, he said to me, I want you to look like Rasputin and behave like Marilyn Monroe. And that's what I did.
Between the three of us, there wasn't hardly room to breathe, which I know made it funnier, but I felt like a sardine squished in there. And I think it was very clever on Mel's part and the set designer to make it so small. You know, usually you act it small, but there's a lot of room. But that was really tiny.
Zero Mostel had put his hand in a place that was not really to put his hand, and he was doing that. I was in pain. And then when I saw the movie, well, I thought, well, the best thing I can do now is really leave America.
I remember thinking when we were filming it, must be how the audience is going to react.
Christopher Hewitt. He was the first one who read for the role of Roger Debris. There were no other readings. He came up, he read, and I said, that's it. He's perfect. We go no further.
There were Hitlers in all shapes and sizes. We had lesbian Hitlers, we had you name it. In fact, a woman I had gone to school with, I looked around and there she was with a little Hitler mustache on. She was going to audition also. I remember at lunchtime, they all wanted to go eat at the Cromwell drugstore in the RCA building on 50th Street. The Playhouse Theater, I think, was on 47th Street between 6th and Broadway, and 4 or 5 Nazi officers in full regalia, swastikas on their arms, walked up 6th Avenue to have lunch at Cromwell drugstore, and a lot of people were really amazed at that.
Dick Shawn, who turns out to be LSD, was always my first choice. And I just called him. I read him the part on the phone. He said, I'm in. Count me in. He said, besides, I'm out of work. So I'll take whatever you got. You know, so he was a genius in it. We needed Eva Braun, and Joe Bologna was going with a beautiful blonde girl called Renee Taylor. And Joe Bologna knew a friend of mine and called him, and he called me and said, Renee is very funny and very pretty, and she'd be. So we got Renee Taylor. The truth is, I began my career as a drummer, so rhythm is critical to me. The rhythm of a scene, the rhythm of singular performances, the rim shot of a joke. So as a drummer, I had a lot of unconscious and innate sense of what was rhythmically correct. And it has stood me in good stead all my life as a director. Music has always been very important to me. I think music is the speech of the soul.
There's a Mel Brooks theory of filmmaking. What it is 3/4 of the way through the film, you have to give the audience a zets. And fortunately for choreographers and dancers, it's a musical number.
I knew when it should sing in the movie because in the script it says, and now presenting Springtime for Hitler. Well, it better sing here. If it doesn't sing here, we're in a lot of trouble. You know, we're in the shit house. Start singing.
Mel really wrote Springtime for Hitler and the song at the end. And what he did was we got a rehearsal pianist who sat at the piano, and then Mel kind of sang what he had in mind. And then the guy recorded it, played it, and then wrote the music down. And so then John Morris basically worked on his own, and I believe he also, hired his own musicians and did all the scoring.
I came to the producers knowing nothing about film scoring. He first asked me to do the number, Springtime for Hitler. He said, just make the worst, big, wonderful, flashy, but terrible. So Alan Johnson, the choreographer, and I did that. And then Mel asked me to do the score.
John Morris was by far the most creative, the most gifted, and the very best arranger that Broadway had at that time. He was in a class with the very best. The minute we worked on the producers, I knew I must never let this man free. And I took him, he did practically every movie I made. John Morris would do the orchestrations. Alan Johnson, the choreographer, was so helpful. Because with the help of Alan Johnson, we conceived the whole Springtime for Hitler number as a vaudeville show, as a burlesque show.
We went into pre-production in the studio with John Morris, and Mel threw out every crazy idea he could think of. And they were great, but some were a little over. So we honed it down to something, and we basically laid out the number.
So Alan said, why don't we do a parade number. So when you sing Springtime for Hitler, I'll just have beautiful German girls with beer foam on their breasts, and I'll put pretzels on them, and I'll do a lot of German things. And that was a brilliant idea.
There was one showgirl, and she was over 6 foot tall. And when she saw her costumes, she said, this is really true, she said, I've worked long and hard to get where I am, and I'm not going to wear swastikas on my tits. And we couldn't switch costumes with one of the other girls because she was much bigger. And so they had to just drop the whole thing. And I think she wore black eagles.
After about a week, Mel came in with the DP. They looked at it. We discussed shots. And then it seemed a minute later that we were in the theater doing it.
We had to get a theater that had very specific requirements, the basement and the rooftop, and we needed a theater across the way. That theater doesn't exist anymore. It's the Playhouse Theater. It was a theater really not suited for what we had to do. It didn't have an orchestra pit. We needed an orchestra pit. What I did for the orchestra pit was I removed about 3 or 4 rows of seats in the front of the stage, and we had a little brass rail and a drape that ran across the whole front, in front of the last row that we left remaining seated. And we had low lights that sort of created a glow from back there, as if they were the music stand lights from the people in the orchestra. And the conductor was really sitting on what we call an apple box. He was probably sitting about 8 inches off the floor, conducting, as if he was conducting a full orchestra.
Actually making the production number was an amazing task. We did it all in one day. Normally, in a movie musical, even in the 30s, they would take a week to shoot a Fred Astaire number or a Busby Berkeley number for sure. But we had a lot going on in Springtime for Hitler, and we actually did it in one whole long day.
Mel always shoots with multiple cameras. It's economically wise. You're covered from different angles, and you can match in editing.
I personally didn't like the reading of the guy who read, "Don't be stupid, be a smarty, come and join the Nazi party." I didn't like his German accent because he was a good dancer and a great guy, of course. But he didn't have, "Don't be stupid, be a smarty, come and join the Nazi party." He didn't have the joie de vivre and the bounce and the German. So I did it, and I do it on Broadway too. If you go to see the producers on Broadway, you will hear Mel Brooks do that line. Peter Marinos, who's the actor, he's great. He mouths it, you know. But I'm very proud of my reading of that line. It's my only appearance in the producers. I said, "Alan, I need one up-tempo like Ravel's Bolero. Bum, cha-cha-cha-chum, cha-cha-cha-chum, cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-chum, cha-cha-cha-chum, as an overhead shot. And I'd like to be able to see a pattern that becomes a swastika." And he said, "I can do it. I can put silver epaulets so that you will see it will become a swastika." And then after he did it, and he said, "Oh my God, can we show this anywhere? Are we allowed to show this?" I said, "Look, my favorite expression is when you go up to the bell, ring it, or don't go up to the bell." And I said, "We've gone too far. We've got to ring the bell. You know, we've got to make our statement." And we did, and, you know, and that swastika is quite a statement.
When I saw Springtime for Hitler, I was sitting with all the extras. There were about 200 extras, and we all saw it for the first time together. It was wonderful. It took my breath away that they were actually doing such a thing. It was great.
The columns becoming cannons. I was inspired by that from an Eleanor Powell movie. There was a dance number set on a battleship, but that was just something I could do, starting out with columns and swastikas, which then fly up, and then they lower down, and then the explosions happen.
During World War II, the English hired people to make jokes about Hitler, and that was a propaganda effort, because if you make a joke about somebody, you don't take them that seriously. They don't seem to be that formidable. You can beat them.
Jewish organizations at the beginning were outraged. You couldn't blame them. People had actually had relatives in the Holocaust, and they were simply outraged. They didn't get the joke, and you couldn't blame them because it was too close to them. But you got to be big and brave.
People think that we improvise in the movies that Mel and I have done. We never improvised at all. If something wasn't working, we would stop and change it, mostly the physical behavior, or Mel would change lines. But we did not improvise. But when it came to that last scene in the courtroom of the producers, I said, Mel, we've gone through a whole movie. Now I'm sitting in the courtroom and I don't say anything about what I went through with Max. Well, what would you want to say? Well, as it happens, I had written it out, what I wanted to say. He said, all right, but change this line to this and this to this.
He did a lot of ad-libbing. I think I kept most of that in because it was so sweet.
Lincoln Center was the great thrill of my life at that time. That was the last day of filming. We got there just as the sun was going down to set up. And when the water shot up from the fountain and I was running around, I said, I'd like to do this for the rest of my life. It was a great scene to do, and we didn't finish until just about when the sun broke through. And we all went to breakfast at the brasserie. We had bacon and eggs. That was the last scene in the picture.
The people from Embassy Films all got in the limousine and left. And so then there we were, and we finally found a drugstore with a phone and called a cab and got to the train. And now it was very late at night, and we're on the train going back to New York. And the world is, going by, and it's very dark out the window. And we're very, very depressed. And there were these other guys in the train who had come down to Philadelphia to see Gorilla Monsoon wrestle. And they were doing wrestling holds in the aisle.
I thought, okay, maybe there was a career for me somewhere. It certainly wasn't in movies, I knew that. This was the last movie, first and last movie I'd made. When I got back that night, my wife said, "You're white. What happened?" And I explained slowly. And I couldn't sleep. We stayed up reading to each other all night from different books just to get through the night. It's the worst night of my life.
In 1967 or so, I wrote with Larry Tucker, my partner, I Love You, Alice B. Toklas. Peter Sellers read it and decided he wanted to do it. And during the making of the picture, Peter Sellers came to me one day and said, "You know, Paul, I'm very lonely out here. It's lonely. There's nothing to do here at night. It's such a strange city. I would like to start a film club, a film society. We'll meet every Tuesday or Wednesday night at the Charles Aderkoff Studios. And each week we'll show a film of one person's choice. And to go with it, we'll have the food of that film, the food of that country. I'd like to start with Padha Panchali, Satyajit Ray's Indian film, and I will bring the tandoori chicken and all of the Indian curries and condiments to go with it." So we have the first showing of Padha Panchali. He brings the Indian food. We all get a little stoned on Alice B. Toklas brownies. We have a great time. It's just great. Laughing our heads off and enjoying the movie, which I had seen, but it was even better the second time. When it was over, Peter said, "Well, what do we see next week?" And I said, "Well, have you ever seen Vitelloni?" "Vitelloni? I don't think I've ever heard of it." "Fellini's Gli Vitelloni. It's a masterpiece, Peter." "Masterpiece? Fellini? Vitelloni? I can't wait." And I said, "I'll bring La Scala hors d'oeuvres." And my wife said, "I'll make some spaghetti." He said, "I can't wait. Vitelloni, hors d'oeuvres, spaghetti. Oh, I'm so happy." So the next week, we all get there to the Aderkoff Studios, and we are having the brownies, and we're getting kind of loaded. My wife's got a big black pot of spaghetti she's made. I've got all these hors d'oeuvres from La Scala. And Peter finally says, "Well, let's see the Vitelloni." And he says, "Charles, we're ready for the Vitelloni." And he hits the squawk box. And there's no answer for about 10 seconds. And then you hear Aderkoff says, "Mr. Sellers, I ain't got no Vitelloni." "What's a Vitelloni?" "Vitelloni, Fellini's Vitelloni." And I suddenly realized I didn't bring the film. I thought they would have ordered it. He says, "No, what's happened?" And my wife said, "Does anybody want any spaghetti?" And she picks up the cup. He says, "I don't want any spaghetti, and I don't want any Vitelloni. Ever, ever, ever. I don't want it. Ever." And just then you hear the voice come out of the squawk box saying, "I ain't got no Vitelloni, but I got some movie here. I don't think I'm supposed to show it, but who's going to know? It's something by this guy, Mel Brooks. It's called The Producers. Put it on, as long as it's not Vitelloni." Don't care what it is. Just put it on. And the movie goes on. And as the movie unfolds in the first 5 or 6 minutes, we're on the floor. It's hilarious. Zero Mostel. Gene Wilder on the floor. Well, the movie ends, and it's a masterpiece. The lights come up. Peter's in the back. He opens a little book that he has, and he starts dialing the phone. It's midnight in L.A. Hello? Hello, Joe. I know it's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's Peter Sellers. I've just seen the greatest film ever. It's even better than Fellini's Vitelloni. It's a film called The Producers, and you're the producer. It's by Mel Brooks. It's a work of genius, Joe, and I'm taking out full-page ad in both trades tomorrow. Sorry to have woken you. Thank you. That's the story of how Peter Sellers saw The Producers. He did take the ads out the next day.
Little by little, I don't know what happened. Sidney Glaser was great. He demanded that the movie be released as per contract. So it had to be released at least in one prime theater in one major city. So in New York, Joe Levine had a deal with the Fine Arts Theater on 58th Street. I believe it was in February. And lo and behold, there was a line around the block. Somehow the word had gotten out that this was a very special movie and that New Yorkers would like it. The critics in New York didn't like the movie much. There was a guy in Time magazine that liked it, and there was Gene Shalit. Gene Shalit, the critic then for Look magazine. He loved it. He said, I'll never forget his review. No one will be seated in the last 88 minutes of The Producers. They'll all be rolling around on the floor. You know, it was a great review. We went to the Academy Awards. I couldn't believe it when I won. I never expected it. I was up against all these heavyweights. And when Frank Sinatra said in the winner, Mel Brooks, I couldn't believe it. I didn't even have a speech. I had no speech. I got up and I said, I must tell you what's in my heart. And I just said, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. I just did this comedy bit. And I thanked a few people and didn't thank enough people because I was unprepared, you know, and flustered. But it was amazing. It was, there was the Oscar for Best Screenplay.
I was a little surprised when I was nominated, but the script supervisor said I wouldn't be surprised if you got an Academy Award nomination for this. And then when I got the call saying you were nominated, I was really surprised. But when I saw it, I said, yes, that's good work. Between The Producers and Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, we did 3 of the funniest pictures, American pictures ever made.